Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by the Dude Ranchers Association and Golden Wings Horseshoes and produced by Cowboy Spirit USA. What would it be like to follow the Lewis and Clark Trail or be Wyatt Earp in a Western reenactment? One person who knows is historian and author Rod Timanus. He joins Russell and Allen to give them the lowdown of what this is all about.
Morning, Alan. Sadly, in one regard, I'm not sitting across the table from you today. Instead, I'm at Southern Cross Dude Ranch taking the classic busman's holiday with some German friends of mine, Wolfgang and Petra, a dude ranch near Madison, Georgia. And I'm looking across the green grass and the fat horses and the beautiful oak trees. I don't know. They must be 80 foot tall. It's pretty amazing.
You're lucky to be there. That sounds like I like to see it through your eyes.
Well, it's pretty big, kind of plantation style home, and riding through the trees and over the little creek. I'm not in Arizona anymore.
Good for
But
you.
anyway, today, well, it's fun. I got to go. I'm going home tomorrow. It's a short visit, but I love dude ranches. So anyway, today we have a really interesting historian and done some interesting stuff, retracing the steps of famous Westerners. Rod Timanus is a U.S. Army veteran, served in Vietnam, wounded in combat. After earning a BA in graphic design, Rod contributed illustrations and then later articles to various publications. And then he retraced the last journeys. I mean, these are some journeys. The last journeys of Davy Crockett, General Custer, well, then Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, Lewis and Clark expedition of 1804 through 1806. And he's written books about each journey. He's also penned articles for the Wild West Gazette, the Arizona Republic, the Big Phoenix paper, and the Tombstone Times. He's written about one of my favorite places, Montezuma Castle National Monument. Love that place. Tuzigoot National Monument. He's written about Texas forts. His first Western novel, The Penitent Gun, came out this year. Even before it was published, the Wild Bunch Film Festival awarded it first place in Best Unpublished Manuscript. When he's not writing about the Old West, Rod relives it. He's a performer with the historical reenactment group, the Arizona Gunfighters. He's played such characters as Wild Bill Hickok, Doc Holliday, Curly Bill, Morgan Earp, Billy Clanton. He's been a good guy, a bad guy, complicated guys. He's a member of the Western Writers of America, Arizona Historical Society, and Rod is joining us from Glendale, Arizona today. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And for your German friends, Guten Tag, wie geht's?
They'll appreciate that, and they better listen.
I hope so.
Rod, what inspired you to map out and follow some of these famous trails? What got you into that historical trail?
Well, I have a distant cousin who lives in Humboldt, Tennessee, and that's just a few miles away from Rutherford, Tennessee. And reading up on David Crockett, it turns out that he built his very last cabin in Rutherford before he saddled up and rode down to Texas and wound up at the Alamo. And I had family. My mother and sister lived in Texas, and I used to make the drive down. I was living in Connecticut at the time, and I would stop in Tennessee and visit with Clifton, and then I would drive to Texas and visit with my mother and sister. And I got to thinking I'd probably go the same way that Crockett took to get to Texas. And I started looking at old journals and newspapers and different histories about Crockett, and it turns out I was right. So I got a hold of some modern maps and mapped out a driving route that closely approximates the route that he rode on horseback, obviously, into Texas. And after signing up to be in the Revolutionary Army, he rode over to San Antonio and wound up at the Alamo. And so I retraced it, and I wrote in the first book on the Crockett Trail about what happened to him out there and what people would find if they went out there today as far as historic restorations or original sites. And I call it a history travel book. You can take it on vacation and get an education at the same time.
What prompted you to write a book like that? What were you already a writer, or what's your background to come to that point?
Well, actually, no, I hadn't been writing full-time or anything extensive before that. I started out as a book illustrator. As a kid, I always wanted to draw comic books, so illustration was always my forte. And I did some history books by Bill Groneman on the Texas Revolution and the Battle of the Alamo. And I figured one time, how hard could it be to write and illustrate my own books? So I looked around for a subject, and Crockett was on my mind because of the family connection to the same locations, and I gave it a shot. And then I started a series with Pioneer Press on the trail books. I did a couple of other historic journeys after that before the gas prices went through the roof.
So you did Lewis and Clark. That must have been monumental. I mean, it's well documented, but that was a big journey.
Yes, I worked with the journals. Actually, every member of the expedition was supposed to keep a journal, and there was only 2 that survived. Lewis's was never published, but Clark's was very extensive, and that was published. And I guess they must have incorporated some of Lewis's notes in there, but he suffered from depression, bouts of depression, and there were long stretches where he didn't make any entries in his journal. And then the other journal was written by one of the members of the expedition. So with the journals and contemporary articles and things, I mapped out a driving route from Illinois, where their first camp was, Camp Dubois, which is right across the Mississippi River from St. Louis. And then I just drove it all the way to Astoria, Oregon, on the Pacific coast.
Did you drive and write, or did you do the whole trip and reflect
I drove
back?
it after I mapped out a route as close to the Missouri River as I could, because that's where they spent the majority of their time, going upriver to the headwaters of Missouri, and I didn't think my truck would float that far upstream. So I had to get out the maps and find a road or a highway that was as close to the river as you could be.
So as you were driving, you were thinking what you were going to write. I mean, you had a purpose with it.
I took notes every night when I stopped. I would write down my impressions, and I took a lot of photographs along the way, because these books do have a lot of photographs of what I wrote about in them, and I took all the pictures. Of course, this was back before digital cameras, so I couldn't review the photos until I got them back from the drugstore. So I would refer to my notes, and then when I got back, I would just sit down at home and seclude myself and write until I couldn't write anymore.
And you had a purpose all the time. You were going to write a book about their travels.
Yes, and it took me about a month to retrace the Lewis and Clark route, driving across the country.
Well, that's I'm trying to envision how you would envision, doing that, and that sounds like a really interesting journey you took.
So it was fascinating to actually stand in some of the same locations. There are historic sites and historic markers along the what they call the Lewis and Clark Trail, where you can stand in the same places that they did. And I discovered a few of them on my own, too. But I also took a video camera. You remember the shoulder video cameras, VHS cameras? I had one of those, and when I went home, I could pop it into the VCR and refresh my memory.
So Rod, the Custer Trail has kind of an odd connection to dude ranching, and I don't literally know the answer, but the very first dude ranch, and it's probably not in some ways absolutely accurate, but the ranch that we all acknowledge to be the original that still operates is Eaton's Ranch in Wolf, Wyoming, near Sheridan. And fifth generation family still operates it, and they've been there since 1901. But they started cattle ranching and horse ranching in the Dakota Territory prior to the states, and they called their place the Custer Trail Ranch. And ultimately, 1892, they began to take paying guests. But one story is that it was called Custer Trail because it was near the trail, or the trail went through it. And the other story is that as Custer was approaching the Bighorn, that they camped at the site of the ranch. So where did that trail take you through? Because that's an overlap with early days of dude ranching.
Yeah. Well, it depends on where exactly the ranch is located, because obviously they stopped and camped every night, so there is numerous campsites along the route. And I started in Fort Lincoln, North Dakota, which is where he was stationed and where the 7th Cavalry was stationed. And then I mapped out the route as closely as I could with the roads existing now. But I stopped in a little town I believe it was Montana, and I had located what I thought was a probable campsite. And in a lot of areas out there, the pavement stops about a mile off the freeway, the interstate, and you're on dirt roads. In this particular case, you got off and you were on a dirt road until you got close to this little town, and then you got pavement. And it was like a crossroads. Two roads came together, and they were paved for about a mile, and then it was dirt road after that. And I stopped at a combination gas station, post office, restaurant right there at the crossroads, and I was talking to some of the locals, and they had no idea that Custer had camped in their vicinity. But they were very interested in what I was doing, and they were very nice. But a lot of these campsites are lost to history now. They're just approximate. You figure out how many days they were on the trail and how many nights they would have to have stopped.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the interesting parts of it is I was going down I was retracing the Rosebud River, which is part of the journey itself. And again, I got off the interstate. I had about a mile of pavement, and then it went to dirt road. And I was driving along beside the little Rosebud, which is so narrow in spots you can step over it. And I just stopped the truck, turned it off, got out, and listened. And it was just silent. You could almost hear the jingle of harness as horses went by. And that's the way I like to do history. I like to experience it, put myself there. And I just imagined what it would have been like riding down that little valley beside that Rosebud River and hearing the wind blow, watching the birds soaring back and forth, and not hearing any airplanes going over or any cars on the interstate. And it just gave me a real chill to do that. And I experienced it the same on the battlefield itself when I got to the Little Bighorn. Again, I had video camera with me. I had still camera. And my memory of that, walking the battlefield and driving the entire distance, because it was a running battle on horseback, basically, I was not aware of any outside sounds. It was.
Well, I tell you, my last trip with my father, we were in Montana, and which is where he grew up, and because we were in the area, we went to the battlefield site, and for whatever reason, I think it's very well done. Kind of, it's a soft touch, but they did it in a way that's, I think, super impactful with the crosses and the walkways and just you.
Oh yes,
you have a
lot
sense
of people don't realize you come into the park where the battle ended, not where it started.
Mm.
You have to drive a considerable distance to go to where it actually started. You come in at the end, at Last Stand Hill.
Right. Yeah, and they've got, of course, identified who was where if they knew. Do you have any other trail books coming up or in mind?
Well, no, I'm not. Actually, I had done
at the end of the trail.
Two other journeys. I retraced the Nez Perce escape route from Oregon to Montana.
Oh yeah.
They and actually went through Yellowstone after it was designated a national park. So they brought a war to Yellowstone, a national park. I did that one 40 miles from the Canadian border, which was their destination. Is where they finally gave up.
I've got to interrupt right now, and we've got to take a little break, and we'll finish up right where we leave off.
Today's episode is brought to you in part by the Dude Ranchers Association. The Dude Ranchers Association, since 1926, has been providing the original Western adventure, and I would say, I add to that, the Western adventure destination vacation, because once you're there, you're going to want to stay there. It's the perfect, now we're looking at summer, it's the perfect summer vacation for families. It's a good time to start thinking ahead for fall break, because that's coming at us sooner than we like. And the Dude Ranch is the place to do it. And of course, dude ranching is always thought of as a place for families, and that's for good reason. But singles and couples, they have a great time there too. And there's so much for everyone to do. I was just talking to one of our guests here, and he was talking about how this trip, for whatever reason, after many years of coming, he just somehow riding didn't grab him like it normally does. And he just relaxed and enjoyed all the other things that sometimes just sitting on the couch reading. But there is so much to do out there, and it's, of course, in nature and all this unspoiled country that Dude Ranches celebrate and expose people to. It's on horseback, trail, hiking. People hike, get out there maybe on ATVs or UTVs. E-bikes are huge now at Dude Ranches. Mountain bikes have always been there, or a long time have been there. Archery, shooting, rafting if you're near the river. But it's all centered around that special brand of Western hospitality that, at least in my view, is pretty hard to beat. The meals are great. They're that kind of food you expect at a ranch in the good sense. And a lot of them are outside, breakfast rides, lunch cookouts, evening campfires, often with sing-alongs. The Dude Ranch Association has been working hard, almost 100 years now, and unrelentingly so, to put together the best ranches west of the Mississippi. And they've got a few over 90 right now that have met that high standard, and they're all the way from luxury ranches serving, what we call cuisine, to those cattle ranches that accept guests. And it's just there's a dude ranch on the duderanch.org site for you. You want to go there, and if you don't find the exact answer, probably doesn't happen very often, but if you're confused because there's an embarrassment of riches, call them, go to the website, get their phone number, and they'll help you narrow that selection and get to a duderanch.org. Remember, it's O-R-G. Get to duderanch.org and find the perfect dude ranch for you. So, Rod, can I ask you, the Nez Perce Trail, is that what they today call the Chief Joseph Trail? And
that's exactly what it was. The white man seemed to pick a chief or a leader and put him in charge of everything. I mean, in their minds, he was the man. Chief Joseph was not a war chief. Looking Glass was the war chief who conducted the fight against the army and worked out all the tactics. And surprisingly enough, they were being chased by the 7th Cavalry, the reconstituted 7th Cavalry. This happened in 1877. It's a year after Custer and a quarter of his men were wiped out at the Little Bighorn.
They put them all back together and kept them out there still chasing Indians, right?
Well, the 7th Cavalry had a bone to pick with any Indian at that point.
Yeah.
And so they pursued them doggedly and fought them in a couple of places, but they just couldn't stop them. Joseph was more of a spokesman for the people. He left the warfare to Looking Glass and his warriors, but all they wanted to do was get to Canada. They didn't want to be put on a reservation away from the Wallowa Valley or near the Palouse River. That's where we get the name Appaloosa for the horse. If you had a spotted horse, it was a Palouse horse.
And the name shortened to Appaloosa.
It evolved into Appaloosa. I used to have 2 Appaloosas of my own. And so I studied the history of the horse itself quite extensively. They're the first identifiable horse in history. They have cave paintings in France that the cavemen did, and they have a black horse with a white rump and black spots on it. It's the first identifiable breed of horse in history. And they're wonderful animals.
Yeah, strange factoid.
Yep.
Well, tell us about your first novel.
Oh, yeah, that came about very strangely. I was casting around for another history book to write. What subject should I pick this time? And about that same time, all the statues got attacked and people wanted to deny and rewrite history. And I just got discouraged. I said, why bother? I wouldn't know from what direction the objections would come from. So my companion here, Barb, and several friends from the Western writers and elsewhere said, why don't you take all the historical knowledge you have and write a fiction?
That's a reverse trend, isn't it? Most people take up fictional things and then want to find the real facts. So you turned that upside down.
I did it backwards, but then I considered, well, if it's fiction, it's a lie. Who can object to that? I made it up out of my own head. They can't object to that. So I did. Took me a while to come up with the characters who are based on people I've known in my life and their personalities. And I set it in Arizona, up near Sedona, Prescott area. And I created this book, and people love it. That's really basically all I can say about it. I had fun doing it, and I'm already halfway through a sequel.
The name of the book?
The Penitent Gun is the first one. And the second one is going to be called Return to Rio Bonita. My main character is a former marshal, Army scout, bounty hunter, whatever, who is trying to make up for his violent past. He
is he in
drops
both
out of
books
sight.
then? Does he go from one book to the next?
Yeah, well, he's going to be the same character, but he changes his name and he winds up in Arizona, and he tries to do penance for his violent past by helping people. And he started out as a marshal in a small town in Texas when he made the decision to disappear and become somebody else and do good deeds instead of shooting people. So in the sequel, he's going back to Texas. He feels that he has finally redeemed himself in the Penitent Gun and heads back to Texas to renew acquaintances and look up an old flame. And
but is that realistic, leaving Arizona to go to Texas? I'm just kidding. So
well, you never know. It depends on whether you're from Texas or not.
Yeah, no, I just offended everybody in Texas. So just
well,
to
if you
get
really
Arizona
want to offend a Texan, remind them that the Battle of the Alamo was fought in Mexico.
Okay. So
and then
what era is
then
the Penitent Gun?
Duck and cover.
Yeah, no kidding. What era are the books?
Pardon me?
What era do your
it's the 1880s.
1880s. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that was the time, wasn't it? Everything. Allen's Ranch started in 1880. Yeah. I forget what kind of percentage of historic ranches in Arizona started.
Well, the territory just basically got settled in the late 1800s
right.
and early 1900s.
Well, that's when the transportation got better, too.
Right. Well, and Geronimo...
You had the Transcontinental Railroad, you had the stage lines, and people could get here better and easier.
Right. Well, yeah, Geronimo's still running around until 1886 when he surrendered for the final time.
Yeah.
So
he's always a troublemaker somewhere in history.
He was one. He caused a lot of grief, both sides.
He gave the Army fits.
Yeah, and his own people in many ways.
Oh, yes, when he kidnapped all those people and made them part of his fighting force.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of them survived.
And then he ended up to be a movie star.
Yeah.
How does that? How does all that occur?
Who knew?
Yeah.
So you also do reenactments.
Yes, I do.
And
I'm
do you
with
still do that?
A group. I still do. As long the audience doesn't get too close to me and see that I'm about 50 years older than the characters I'm playing. I'm with the Arizona Gunfighters. It's owned and operated by Bob and Dale Carnes out of Mesa, Arizona. And
where do you perform?
We're going down.
Where do you perform?
We're going down to Tombstone for Wyatt Earp Days over the Memorial Day weekend. And fingers crossed that I get to play Doc Holliday. It's always kind of spooky to play a real person in the location that they were. It's almost like he's standing behind me, looking over my shoulder, going, "Y'all better get it right." So I'm standing right here watching you.
Is he one of your favorite roles? Yeah.
But I play Wild Bill Hickok because I'm the only one crazy enough to put on a long-haired wig in this heat. Well, we do have other people that play the characters. They like to have at least 3 performers who can play a certain part. That way, if somebody can't make it or something happens. But I like playing Doc Holliday. He's my character. And having grown up in South Florida and worked very hard to lose my southern accent, it's nice to bring it out every once in a while and use it.
How often do these events happen, and where do you go for these performances?
We perform once a month during the cooler months up at Frontier Town in Cave Creek. And twice a year we go down to Tombstone for the events there. As I said, we're going for Wyatt Earp Days, Memorial Day weekend, and then again in September for the showdown in Tombstone over the Labor Day weekend. We used to do the shootout on Whiskey Row in Prescott, which was always a delight because it's 20 degrees cooler up there in June and July, except we always got rained on. But they decided not to do that anymore. So Tombstone are our two big field trips.
And so for the White Earp Days, is your show there on the main street, Allen Street in Tombstone?
Well, at the intersection of Allen and 4th, yes.
Yeah, of course.
It was inside of the OK Corral, but it wasn't. The battle or the fight didn't take place there. It took place on Fremont Street, a block down, in the alley behind the OK Corral.
How many times? Right. How many times a day do you do it? 2 or 3 times in a day?
We have our sets. We do twice a day.
Twice a day. Yeah.
First one's usually around noontime, and the second one is 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But we do historical reenactments. We don't do comedy routines.
Yeah.
We do our own gunfight near the OK Corral, and it's all based on history.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of history in Tombstone. And what happens? Do you do the same show at Labor Day? You said you come for Labor Day. Also
you're cutting out a little bit, Russell.
Yeah, you're garbling.
Same thing in September?
Yes, yeah, we'll do the 2 performances over the weekend, each day.
Okay.
And they seem to enjoy having us come down there. We seem to draw the biggest crowds, let's say that.
Well, that would make them happy.
Yes, yeah, it's all for local organizations anyway, and we don't mind doing that.
Well, it's been great to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you. It's been a great pleasure to be here. Of course, at my age, it's a pleasure to be anywhere.
Several of us can relate to that.
Well, I live in history, so.
So, Rod, I assume the books are. We know that people can come see you in Tombstone in Memorial Day or Labor Day, and your group, the Arizona Gunfighters.
I hope they will.
Yeah, well, we do too. We're obviously big supporters of Tombstone.
Oh, and I also do the Tucson Book Festival every year, too. I sell my books there on the campus.
Well, we always try and get there. I think Alan hasn't missed it in who knows how long with all his
we
books.
Go every year there, yes.
So, Rod, they can get your books, Amazon bookstores. Is that true?
Well, it's from Thorndike Press, and it's what they call a library binding, which means it's a hardcover.
Okay.
And when I first approached them with the idea, they said, "Do you mind writing for a specific audience?" And I said, "What would that be?" And they said, "We print large print books."
I can relate to that.
People that have trouble with their eyesight, and for children that have problems with name recognition when the text is too small. So I said, no, I have no problem writing that. So it's a large text hardcover book.
And is that across the board, both the fiction and the trail series?
The trail series, you can usually go online and find them. You know, all my books I think are online.
Under your name?
Except for an illustrated history of Texas Forts, which is out of print. But I've lived long enough to see one of my books go out of print. Imagine that.
They're all under your name, Rod?
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
And that's Rod, R-O-D, and then last name, Timanus. Last question, since you did the Texas Forts, did you go to Cibolo Creek, which is a dude ranch, and Cienega?
No, I can't say I've ever been to a dude ranch or done any research
they're forts. On it. Yeah, they're a man named John Poindexter, not the one who was with Reagan, but he completely restored 2 forts really spectacularly. So in any case, well, it's been
I'll have
super.
to see about making a trip.
You would love it. I mean, it's a spectacular place to stay, but the restoration was meticulous. Cibolo Creek Ranch, Big Bend Country, 30 miles south of Marfa, Texas. Unbelievable, jaw-dropping. Well, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure
Alan,
to talk.
And it was my pleasure to be here.
We'll see you next time.
Yes, anytime you wish.
Thanks, Rod.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
You know, Alan and I want to thank the folks at Golden Wings Horseshoes for sponsoring our Cowboy Up podcast. And of course, we're honored and you know, it's a big part of what we do that they help us and sponsor us. But, you know, I mean, this is very sincere. I thank them for their revolutionary horseshoes. They're really like no other, and they help horses. And there's no perfect answer to every question, but these special non-metal compound, Fred tells me he's still not really quite sure what it is. It took him 10 years to make it. I'm not sure he's telling me quite the truth on that, but it's a very special compound. And I've got to tell a story. A couple of weeks ago, I was at the Tombstone Monument Ranch Roundup, and Barb from Minnesota, one of my favorite guests, and by the way, she brought 12 cows in alone, and I couldn't have done that. And just see this lady topping the hill with 12 cows in front of her as she led them to catch up with us. And they had escaped us, and Barb went out on her own and got them. And she humbly and softly pulled me aside after the drive, and she showed me her trophy buckle, and she said, "Russell, I just want you to know that's trophy buckle number 2, thanks to Golden Wings shoes." And she said, "You know, my retired horse is back competing in cowboy mounted shooting because of Golden Wings shoes. There was no other solution." And she said, "And we're winning buckles again." And she showed me a video, and that horse looked dead sound. And of course, Barb was a dead eye with that gun. And it just, you know, Fred, hats off to you. Barb's winning buckles again, thanks to Golden Wings Horseshoes. And you go to Golden Wings Horseshoes, plural.com. Golden Wings, plural, horseshoes.com. And they'll get you, and Fred's fantastic. He gets them out right away, and they're easier to put on, so your farrier will love you.
All right, friends, thanks for joining us. Remember to add Rod's book, The Penitent Gun, to your summer reading list. A shout out to Stan Houston and his production company. Next week, we shift gears to talk about one of our favorite topics, horses, and specifically how they affect our mental health. So be sure to tune in. Until then, I'm Lynn Weezy Sneed, reminding you to sit tall and ride safe.